Okay, I think it's settled. Hello, my lovelies, and welcome to another episode of the Magnus Archives Review. Today we will be reviewing episode 13, one of the iconic episodes, because we do not have Mr. Johnathan being the narrator. But of course, since it's Johnathan, he's still appearing kind of in the episode. But anyways, the episode is called Alone, and the voice actor for this one name is Naomi Hearn, and the date for this episode is 2013, January 13th, which I'm guessing this is the same day that they kind of like filmed it, because the little bantering back and forth at the very beginning was so adorable. Anyways, I won't share the case number with you guys because I don't think it's all that interesting right now, but let's get started. So she starts the statement by telling us that she thinks that she imagined this entire thing that she's about to tell us, and that she's a very anti-social person as is, and she sometimes prefers to be alone because humans can be a lot, which understandable. Humans can 100% be a lot. I completely agree. But she goes in to tell us that she does have a pastor that she does talk to, and her pastor is actually kind of worried about her. And she gives some quotes, of course, because I love these quotes. She gives quotes from the pastor. The quotes specifically say, "We are creatures of community by nature." And he was worried that she would get lost. She felt comfortable talking to him. It was one of the only pastors she could really talk to. And she tells us that after she graduated, she went to go be a science technician, and she was a science technician close to London. She doesn't really say which suburb, but it's really close to London because she didn't want to be a science tech her whole life. She wanted to work and live in London. So she went to a bunch of different job interviews, and at one of these job interviews, she met Mr. Evan. And Evan was going in for an interview as well, and they got to chat before their interview, but then she did have to go in to do an interview, but Evan waited for her outside. And when she saw that Evan waited for her, she just felt this intense, happy emotion, which is so understandable because he's a guy, so it makes sense. But she felt very comfortable talking to him. Everything just came easy when she was talking to him, versus her other two short relationships where the men kind of felt like they weren't really ever wanted. It's kind of when Naomi began to have a social life. She friended a lot of his friends. She felt like she could actually go out and do things with him and his friends. She actually felt like she could socialize again. But then, unfortunately, Evan actually, after she proposed to him, after just 2 years, and they got married for a little while, he ended up actually, unfortunately, passing away. It was apparently a rare heart problem. There was no way of seeing it beforehand, and she kind of brushes this off because she doesn't really want to talk about it too much, which understandable. It was the love of your life, I can get it. And she goes in to say that there was no way that the doctors could see it coming. And finally, Evan's family held a funeral, and Evan never really spoke about his family to her. It was more so they had a falling out because they were super religious, so that's why he never really spoke of them. She goes in to tell us that when he actually passed away, she kind of felt alone again. She felt like she was by herself in the world because all of his friends, she didn't feel like she could go and hang out with them. Even though this was all in her head, she didn't want to go and hang out with them because she thought it would be weird, so she kind of just distanced herself from them. But going back to the funeral, she did get an invitation even though she never met them. She didn't really think that Evan ever really mentioned her to him, but regardless, she did go to the funeral. It was really raining that day and storming, and there was a lot of wind, and it was really hard to drive in it. But eventually, she did get to it. I think it was called the Moore House, I do believe. And there was a mausoleum for the family, so I can show you how rich they are, really. But she approaches it, and she kind of gets this weird feeling as she gets closer to it. She sees Evan's father over in the doorway of the funeral, and he just looks like joy was completely taken out of him. Like, his face just looks sad and joyless, nothing left in there. And all he says to her is, "My son's in there. He's dead." Which is really grim if you think about it, because it was kind of in an accusatory way. And so when she goes inside, she realizes she knows no one there. So she doesn't really know how to interact with anyone because she knows that no one she knows. And she looks at all their faces, and it's just like the father's. It's all joyless, and if anything, it looks like they're blaming her for what happened, even though they should not blame her for what happened. And of course, she sees Evan in this shiny oak casket wearing a suit, and then she realizes she's never seen Evan ever wear a suit, ever. So this was very side left for him, very alien of him. I thought it kind of reminded her of her father's funeral, except Evan also looked like he had all the joy and everything ripped away from him. Now this is when we kind of get to the weird part. As she looks up from the casket, she realizes that everyone's just sitting there staring at her with blame and absolute disgust in their eyes. And then one of them steps up and is like, hey, I think it's time for you to leave now. We have to do the burial, and that is a family matter. And they go, I'm sure you want to be alone, which is such a weird sentence to say, like, why? But she does take the hint, and instead of walking away, she kind of runs away from it because she felt all of it was just a bit too weird for her. She ran out crying, and she was crying as she was driving her car, and she actually ended up getting into an accident, kind of, sort of. And the accident specifically was her driving into a empty field, but her car had a bunch of smoke coming off of it. And so she got out the car and started walking down the road. Mind you, it's still raining at this time. And she realizes maybe she could just call for help. Maybe she could just call someone to come get her or something. She brings out her phone from her purse, and her phone is completely water, like, damaged. And then she gets really mad, and she slams it to the ground because she's annoyed at this entire situation. And honestly, maybe you shouldn't have did that with your phone, because you could have needed that for anything that would have happened to you on the side of a fucking road because you're hitchhiking. But then the rain stopped and fog gathered around her, and the fog felt very malicious. And she said it felt like the fog kind of wanted something, which was something very weird to say. She could see the outline of the trees, but then when she looked down at the dirt, it didn't really seem wet or muddy anymore. So she bent down and put a hand down, and she realized, oh, it's very, very damp. It's not even like it was soaking wet, like it was just raining. So she sees a bunch of dark stone shapes, and then she realizes that she's now in a cemetery. It doesn't feel like she walked that long to be in a cemetery, but she was very, very confused. And then she didn't really want to read all of the little gravestones, so she kind of walked around them. That's when she noticed a small chapel, and she sees these beautiful mural designs on the windows, and so she kind of walks around the chapel to figure out where to open it, and she realizes that there's a chain and lock on the door entrance. She tried to look in the window, she tried to scream for help, and there was no progress. She couldn't see anything from the windows. When she screamed, no one came. And she kind of felt a damp feeling in her lungs. It was very, very weird, and she really didn't like it. So then when she turned around, she saw a bunch of empty graves, which was really, really crazy to her. She was like, what the fuck? So she took one of the gravestone pieces because she was about to smash the lock open, and then she realizes that when she looks down into the grave, not only is the grave open, but the casket's open too, like there's no one in there. She was completely alone, dead bodies and all, like they were gone. If it was me, I'd be concerned about where the fuck the dead bodies went, because what the fuck, this isn't some type of zombie thing. And so every grave was like this, and so she almost fell into one, but then she grabbed onto some of the gravestone and she pulled herself out of the grave. That's when she went over to the chapel door and she opened it using the gravestone that she had in her hand, and that's when she realizes that inside of the chapel was just a completely open field that went down for miles and miles and miles, and there was absolutely not a single soul there. So if she were to go that way, she'd be completely alone. But she decided against it, and so she turned around and she realized the fog was still there, except it was heavier. So she started running away from the chapel and all of the different graves, making sure not to step into any of them. And so as she was doing this, she was realizing, oh shit, I can't really move because the fog is getting really hard to move in. That's when she hears Evan's voice, which is fucking weird because this nigga's dead. And she hears his voice say, oh, turn left. So she makes a sharp turn left, and that's when she gets hit by a fucking car on the side of the road. She ends the statement by saying that she woke up in the hospital, and that was everything. So let's get ready for the important notes part. So some important notes that we do have is that Johnathan, of course, believes it could be something from the head trauma that she had. Maybe she dreamed all of it. And he does the important notes without Naomi, which is really interesting. He believes that it could behead trauma. He confirms that Evan did die on March 22nd of 2015. And Naomi actually brought back something really interesting, which made him believe that it could be true, which was the gravestone piece. It had forgotten on it, but they couldn't really trace what the origin was, and there was no cemetery around her whatsoever. That's when he finds out that on 1 a.m. on March 31st, that's when the collision happened, where she was 5 miles away from her car, which, girl, how the fuck did you walk that fucking far? And she got ran over by someone named Michael. But they did say that she was treated for concussion and dehydration. So that is everything for episode 13. I will see you guys in the next episode of episode 14. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Magnus Archives Review. Now we are reviewing episode 14, the one guy who I actually believe deserves everything that's happening to him. This is Piecemeal, and the victim is Lee Rentoul. And it's not like rental, like you would think you're renting an apartment. It's Rentoul, so Rentoul. Yeah, I just felt like saying that specifically. I'm sorry. This man makes me really upset. But basically, Lee Rentoul was giving a good description of what happened around the events of him killing his business partner, or his associate, Paul Norrie. And at first, he threatens Magnus Archives, being like, if you ever tell what I did about murdering, then I will get back to you guys, or I'll be so far across the country you won't even see me. Like, excuse me, sir. He does say something interesting, though, and that is that his friend Esther came over and said something about ghosts, and apparently the archive was able to help him by telling him what to do differently, apparently. So I don't know what specifically that was, but maybe we'll get an episode from Esther specifically. I hope we do. That sounds interesting. But he tells us about how on June 10th of 2010 he got released from jail, and apparently he went to jail because of Robert, and so, not Robert, oh my god, because of Paul. And he was mad at Paul because of the fact that he put him in jail, basically. And so he wanted to go get revenge on him. So the one time that he tried to, a bunch of security guards beat the fuck out of him, which, well-deserved, bro, well-deserved. He decides to reach out to his friend, Toby McMullen. Toby McMullen is a straight punk, otherwise known as a drug addict, who loves drugs and will never give up drugs and knows that he's fucked up his life. So honestly, props to you, Toby. But he is always high on drugs, so he went to go visit Toby, and Toby was actually kind of happy to hear him say something about Paul, because Paul really fucked him over. Paul told him that if he pinned him during the trial that made Lee go to jail, then he would give him so much drugs his heart could desire. After the trial, where was Paul? Nowhere to be found. He left him high and dry. So Toby wants to get his revenge, and so does Paul. And so Lee asks if there's any way that they can do this. How can they do this? And Toby tells him magic. And so Lee is just about ready to fucking punch him in the face. He's like, what the fuck are you on about? Like, let me hear you out. Okay, fine, I'll hear you out, whatever the fuck you have to say. And then he's like, okay, what type of magic is it? Is it voodoo? And he was like, well, I don't know. And he's like, well, then I'm not going to fucking pay for something I don't know. And so, of course, he says, well, her name is Angela, and I'll go with you to go meet her. And so he tells a little bit of a backstory about Angela, and apparently Angela helped one of his other friends' boyfriends disappear because he cheated on her, which, props to you, girl. But after finding out how he died, that's fucked up. But apparently Angela lives out in the suburban home. Her home is absolutely beautiful. Floral walls, and has a bunch of jigsaw puzzles that are completely completed, and they're framed on her wall, which is adorable. Angela also offered some coffee to both of them, and Lee is just about ready to punch him again. He's ready to punch him again because he's like, this is some old lady that you're telling me is like apparently dangerous when she doesn't seem dangerous. She seems as harmless as a fucking fly. And so, of course, Toby and Lee tell him that they want their friend Paul to die, but they want him to suffer while dying. And so Angela said it wasn't a problem, and of course Lee says, I'm not going to pay you for it though, because I don't know what you're going to do. And of course she says Toby filled her in, and she's already well compensated for what she's going to do. And so the things that she tells him is, it will happen, you just have to be patient. Now here's the key word here, be patient. What did this nigga do? He was not fucking patient. So then Angela goes to tell them that she's gonna need an item that was actually Paul's, and it cannot be something that was gifted from Paul to them. It has to be something that is specifically his. So then of course Lee says, oh, well, I have this lighter that I stole from him a long time ago, so here you go. Which, what the fuck, you're stealing a lighter from your friend? I get it, whatever, it's fine, but okay, go about it then. And so, of course, Lee saw Toby walking around a lot, and he was just kind of like, why aren't you dead yet? You know, and he's trying to figure out, like, when is whatever's going to happen to you? And he had this really important deal coming up, and of course, Lee couldn't take it anymore. He was waiting weeks, and weeks turned into months. But then he started realizing that Paul had a little bit of a limp to him. So of course, because Paul had this important meeting that he had to attend, our boy Lee decides to go over to where the meeting place is as well. And he decides to go over there and wait it out. Wait until he finds out that Paul is alone. And he has his combat knife ready on him waiting. And as soon as he's alone and no one's around him, he goes over inside of the room that Paul is in. And as soon as Paul realizes who it is, he starts stumbling around, being like, oh shit, oh my god, don't do this, bro, don't do this, please, like begging for his life a little bit, being like, don't do this. That's when our boy Lee starts to realize a few things. One, he realizes that some of his fingers aren't there. Two, he realizes that he's limping. And there was just a lot of things that just weren't making sense anymore. And so, of course, out of pure jealousy, Sir Lee decides to stab his bro Paul a lot of times. So then this is when Lee got away with it. He doesn't tell us where the body is, which is fine. That's perfect. That works out. Don't tell us. But he goes in to tell us that he 5 days later was walking on this big metal bridge that he's always walked on, and he sees a package in the middle of the bridge, and the package has his name on it with brown paper wrapped around it and a brown string. At first he thought, oh, someone's fucking with me, someone's trying to kill me. So he brings out his knife and he holds it in his hand while he's opening this box. And he sees a severed finger on some brown wool in the box. He's like, what the fuck? So then as he's tossing the box away, he starts moving really fast on accident, and he trips on something and he slices a finger off. Coincidence or not, finger in a box, you slice your finger off. Does that not fucking mean something to you? He received his second box at his flat, otherwise known as apartment for you Americans. But it is, he received the second one at his flat, and he opens the box and he realizes there's 2 toes in there. And he's like, what the fuck? Okay, whatever. And so he's moving his flat screen TV. He accidentally drops it. It drops on his 2 toes. They sever, which I don't know what type of heavy fucking TV that you were holding, but what the fuck is wrong with you, bro? And then of course he goes to tell us that more accidents kept happening as he kept getting more boxes. And no matter what he did, even if he just sat there in his room, didn't move from his bed, he felt a sharp pain in the morning, and then that part of him would be gone. So he tried everything, but it's just going to happen continuously. So then he went over to Angela and he was begging and pleading for her to help him. And she just acted civil. She was very much just like, she said, and I quote, some hungers aren't to be denied. Then he was angry, so he reached out to her like he wanted to punch her or strangle her or whatever. But then he said somehow he ended up eating his own hand off. That was the weird part. But that's when he started to ask the archive to help him, because he received a box this morning with a severed tongue in it, and he didn't know what to do. He doesn't want to lose his tongue, apparently. But I love that girl, Angela. She is everything I could ever imagine. She's great. Anyways, time for the important notes of this episode. Of course, in our important notes of the episode, we learned that Lee became violent against the staff, really asking for help, being like, you guys need to help me, you need to help me. and he was hospitalized because apparently he ended up losing his tongue in this process somehow. And then Sasha uncovered the 2 police reports, and Martin talked to every single Angela that he could find that loved jigsaw puzzles, and he really liked talking about jigsaw puzzles, which was really, really fun, and he loved it. And Tim tried to follow up, but apparently Paul did end up vanishing, so couldn't figure out where he was. And the only thing that was left in his apartment was a bunch of small cardboard boxes. Hope you guys liked the episode, and if you guys want to hear more of the episodes, let me know. Let me know what I could do better. See you guys on the next ones.